You thought you won, didn't you?
We're not here for the vows.
Then make this quick.
300 people watched Ren Calloway walk into that cathedral alone. No date, no designer dress, no diamonds. Just her, a pair of heels she'd resold twice, and an invitation her ex-husband sent to her workplace, mid-shift, so that every nurse on her ward could watch it happen in real time. The courier walked straight to the nurse's station, asked for her by full name, and placed two things in her hands: an envelope and a box. The envelope was cream with gold trim and smelled like someone else's perfume. The box was small, wrapped neatly. No card. She opened it right there because her colleagues were watching, and she refused to look afraid of a package. Inside was a folded set of scrubs. Her old ones, the ones from the skincare clinic she'd built from scratch, the one Dorian took from her. Except the logo had been changed. Where her name used to sit above the breast pocket, stitched cleanly in navy thread, it now read, Isabeau Choi Aesthetics. Her replacement's name. On her scrubs. Delivered to her job. That is not a coincidence. That is a message, gift-wrapped, hand-delivered, designed to be opened in public. She stood at that nurse's station and felt the specific, airless humiliation of being erased in front of witnesses. Someone touched her shoulder. She smiled, the tight, professional smile you develop after years of delivering bad news without falling apart, walked to the supply room, and read the envelope alone between shelves of saline bags and surgical gloves. You are cordially invited to witness the union of Dorian Seo and Isabeau Choi. Your presence has been personally requested by the groom. Personally requested. By the man who filed fraudulent transfer paperwork on her company while she was hospitalized. Who stood in a courtroom wearing a suit she paid for and called her emotionally volatile. And printed at the bottom, in letters almost shy about their own cruelty, please note all ceremony photography will be shared across public platforms. He wasn't inviting her to a wedding. He was building a stage. She was the prop. The sad, replaced, publicly documented ex-wife. Captured. Distributed. Permanent. Now brace yourself. Isabeau Choi wasn't just the woman Dorian was marrying. She was Ren's college roommate. The woman who held her hand through every brutal night of that divorce. Who whispered, "You deserve so much better than him." Already in his bed before the ink dried. Ren found out the same way you're finding out, all at once, no warning, no mercy, in a supply room that smelled like antiseptic and stolen time. She stood there for 4 minutes. Then she folded the invitation, tucked the scrubs under her arm, and finished her shift. All 12 hours of it. Because that's what surviving looks like, you finish the shift. That night she ironed her black dress. The one that doesn't beg for attention, the one that commands it. She had $11 in her purse and a city bus to catch to a wedding with a $40,000 flower budget. She'd made peace with that. What she could not make peace with was the scrubs. The logo. Her name removed. Isabeau's name stitched in. Delivered publicly. Because that wasn't cruelty born from hatred. That was cruelty born from obsession. Dorian had thought about her enough, specifically enough, to order custom rebranded scrubs and courier them to her hospital. You don't do that to someone you've moved on from. You do that to someone who still lives in your head rent-free, and it's eating you alive. She put the scrubs on the table, stared at them, turned off the light. Then she picked up her phone and called a number saved under one word, don't. As in, do not call this unless the world is ending. She called it anyway. That call changed every single thing Dorian Seo thought he owned. Don't go anywhere. Because when those cathedral doors opened, not even Dorian saw what was coming. And he planned all of it. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, you already know exactly why she made that call. Hit subscribe. Because people like her deserve a full audience. The number had been in her phone for 11 months. Ren had almost laughed when he gave it to her. She wasn't laughing now. She'd met Kong Taeju exactly once, in a hospital waiting room at 2 a.m., the night his younger brother was brought in after a car accident. She was the intake coordinator who stayed 4 hours past her shift to make sure the paperwork didn't bury a scared family in red tape. She'd asked for nothing. He'd noticed everything. When he pressed the card into her hand before leaving, his voice was quieter than the room. People who give without calculating always end up needing someone who can give without limits. That day comes for everyone. She thought it was just a nice thing to say. Turns out it was a countdown. She called the number standing in her kitchen at midnight, wedding invitation flat on the table, her one good black dress already ironed and hanging on the door. It rang once. Just once. And then his voice came through, calm, unhurried, like a man who had been sitting in a lit room waiting for a knock he knew was eventually coming. Except what he said wasn't hello. What he said stopped her cold. I've been staring at this phone for 11 months, waiting for you to realize you're not a victim, Ren. You're an owner. She didn't speak. Couldn't. He continued, steady, deliberate, each word placed like something load-bearing. Do you want your life back? Or do you want him to feel what it's like to lose everything? The kitchen was so quiet she could hear the refrigerator hum. She gripped the phone tighter, swallowed, and said both. A beat of silence. Then, send me the address. She didn't sleep that night. Lay flat on her back, staring at a ceiling with a water stain shaped like regret, running the math on what she'd just set in motion. Because here's what she knew about Kong Taeju, not everything, but enough. Enough to know his name made certain restaurant bookings unnecessary. Enough to know that in the right circles, in Seoul and 3 very specific blocks of the city, grown men rerouted their schedules around his. She'd handed him a wedding address and said both. She either just reclaimed her life, or she just handed the match to someone who didn't believe in small fires. Morning came gray and cold. Dress pressed. Heels on. $11 in her purse and 0 backup plan. The bus smelled like someone's reheated lunch and old ambition. She sat in the back, hands folded, watching the city slide past the window, coffee shops opening, delivery trucks idling, ordinary Thursday morning happening everywhere. Completely indifferent to the fact that Ren Calloway was on her way to the most important entrance of her life on public transport. Nobody on that bus knew where she was going. Nobody knew what she'd set in motion. She barely knew herself. The cathedral appeared around a corner, white stone, ivy, flowers that cost more than 3 months of her rent. Beautiful. Expensive. The architecture of a man who needed everyone to see how far he'd come. Her phone buzzed. One message. No name. Don't sit near the back. You're not a guest. You're the reason everyone came. She read it twice. Looked up at the cathedral doors, tall, open, waiting. Somewhere inside, 300 people were finding their seats. Somewhere inside, Dorian Seo was straightening his tie and feeling untouchable. She put her phone in her bag, clicked it shut, and walked through those doors carrying $11, a pressed black dress, and the quiet, devastating knowledge that the man who just texted her had spent 11 months waiting for her to make that call. Think about that. He waited. Not chased. Not pushed. Waited. Because he already knew what she was. She was just the last one to remember it. The priest never finished the sentence. He was midword, joined in holy, when 2 men in dark suits appeared from the side doors and stepped directly into his eyeline. Not aggressive. Not loud. They simply stood there, solid and immovable as load-bearing walls, and the priest's voice just stopped. Like a plug pulled from a socket. The organ music died with it. One note hanging in the air, then nothing. 300 people felt the silence before they understood it. That specific silence, the kind that doesn't arrive accidentally, pressed down on the cathedral like a held breath. Nobody coughed. Nobody whispered. A flower girl near the front pew looked up at her mother with wide eyes. Her mother had no answer. Then came the sound of unhurried footsteps on marble. Measured. Deliberate. Each one landing like a period at the end of a sentence. Kong Taeju walked up the center aisle, and he did not look at the guests. Did not look at the altar. Did not look at Dorian, who had turned from his bride and was now standing very still with the frozen expression of a man whose body understood the situation 3 seconds before his brain caught up. Taeju looked at his watch. Just his watch. Like the cathedral, the flowers, The 300 witnesses, the $40,000 in white roses breathing their perfume into the vaulted air, like all of it was a mild scheduling inconvenience. He stopped 6 feet from the altar, adjusted his cuff, looked up at Dorian for the first time. "You're 3 minutes over your allotted time on my property." His voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. Stone walls will carry a calm voice further than a shout. Every syllable landed clean in the silence. My property. 2 words. 14 letters. And the entire architecture of Dorian Sio's perfect morning developed a crack straight down the center. Dorian's mouth opened. Nothing useful came out. That's what happens when a man who has spent years controlling narratives suddenly finds himself inside someone else's. Isabeau stood at the altar in her cathedral veil, bouquet in both hands, completely motionless, the way people go motionless when they're rapidly reassessing every assumption they walked in with. The bridesmaids looked at each other. The best man looked at his phone. Ren, sitting in the 3rd row, felt something she hadn't expected, not satisfaction, not triumph. Something quieter. The specific relief of watching a room finally see what you saw alone for years. Teju walked to the 3rd row without ceremony. Sat beside Ren. Reached into his jacket and placed a folded document on her knee. She opened it slowly. Property transfer deed. Signed, dated 4 days ago. The cathedral, its land, its walls, its lease, transferred to a holding company. She looked at him. He was already looking forward, composed, like a man who'd simply come to collect something that belonged to him. The florist works for me, he said quietly. The catering company. The string quartet. She stared. You didn't. The corner of his mouth moved barely. The venue coordinator cried a little. I paid her 3 times her rate. She recovered quickly. Dorian found his voice. Stepped down from the altar toward them, jaw tight, eyes burning. You have no right, Teju turned his head. Slowly. The way something large and unhurried turns. He looked at Dorian the way you look at a notification you've already decided to delete. I have every right, he said. I have the deed. He paused. Would you like to see it? Your ex-wife is holding it. The cathedral held its breath again. Ren looked down at the document in her hands. Felt the weight of it, not the paper, the meaning. This building, this stage Dorian had built to break her in public, now belonged to the man sitting calmly beside her. Every flower, every camera, every witness, assembled for her humiliation, had just been turned around. Pointed in a different direction. First plot twist. And the morning had barely started. Dorian knew something was wrong before he understood what it was. That's how it works with men like him. They build their whole lives on reading rooms. Knowing who has power. Positioning themselves near it. And right now, every instinct he had was screaming that the man sitting beside his ex-wife in the 3rd row was not a +1. He leaned toward his best man. Whispered something. The best man pulled out his phone, typed a name, and went pale. Passed it back. Dorian looked at the screen. Looked up at Teju. Looked back down. The pastor was still talking. Nobody had stopped the ceremony. But Dorian Sio had stopped breathing correctly. Then the wall changed. That's the only way to describe it. The cathedral's north wall, white stone, centuries old, lit by afternoon light filtering through stained glass, suddenly carried a single word projected across it in red. Clean font. No drama. Just the word, enormous and unavoidable, seized. Then below it, a property reference number and a holding company name Dorian clearly recognized because his face didn't show confusion. It showed the specific, terrible recognition of a man seeing something he thought was hidden revealed in letters 3 feet tall in front of his wedding guests. One woman in the 4th row gasped. Then the murmuring started. Teju didn't look at the wall. He already knew what it said. He just watched Dorian. Dorian moved fast, hand into jacket, phone out, pulling up a contact. His lawyer. The one man who could untangle paperwork fast enough to matter. He pressed call. Lifted the phone to his ear. It rang once. Then, across the cathedral, from the 3rd row, a phone buzzed audibly in Teju's breast pocket. Teju reached in. Held it up. Dorian's lawyer's name lit the screen. Teju let it ring one more time, looking directly at Dorian, then declined the call. set the phone calmly on the pew beside him. "He works for me now," he said. Not loudly. Not with satisfaction. Just a fact, delivered the way you state the weather. Dorian's phone went to voicemail. The pastor had completely stopped speaking. Ren stared at the second phone sitting on the pew, like it was a grenade with the pin already pulled. "How long have you been planning this?" she whispered. Taja reached into his jacket, the other side this time, and placed a document on her knee. Property transfer deed. Signed. Dated 4 days ago. The cathedral, its land, its stone, its $40,000 flowers, and its ivory-draped altar transferred to his holding company. She looked at the document. Looked at the seized projection, still burning red on the wall behind the altar, behind Dorian, behind the pastor who was now holding his Bible with both hands like a life jacket. "The florist works for you too," she said slowly, remembering his words from earlier. "And the catering company." He looked straight ahead. The venue coordinator cried briefly. "I tripled her rate." She recovered quickly. Dorian crossed the cathedral floor toward Teju with the energy of a man who has lost, but hasn't accepted it, which, for the record, is the most dangerous and also the most foolish version of a man to be. "You don't know who you're dealing with," he said. Low. Trying for dangerous. Landing somewhere closer to desperate. Teja looked at him the way you look at a bill you've already paid, no urgency, no emotion, just the mild acknowledgement that it exists. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with," he said. "A man who filed fraudulent transfer paperwork on a hospitalized woman, then invited her to watch him celebrate it." He reached into his jacket, placed a second document on the pew beside Ren. She looked down. The original company registration. Her name. Her signature. Her brand. Returned. Stamped and dated this morning, 2 hours before the ceremony. She hadn't asked for this. This wasn't the favor. She pressed it against her chest and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months settle back into place. Not happiness. Something older. Herself. Don't you dare click away, because Isabeau Choi just stepped off that altar. And what she does next is something nobody, not Dorian, not Teju, not even Ren, saw coming. Here's something nobody knew until right now. When Ren opened that wedding invitation, the one with the gold trim and the small print cruelty, there was something else inside the envelope. A single pressed flower. Small. Dried. White. The kind Isabeau used to leave on Ren's desk in college when she knew Ren was having a hard week. No note. No explanation. Just the flower. Ren had stared at it for a long time that night. Turned it over in her fingers. Then set it down and told herself it meant nothing, a coincidence, a leftover fragrance sachet, anything except what some quiet part of her suspected. That Isabeau Choi had put it there on purpose. That somewhere inside the woman who had taken her husband and her earrings, the friend she'd loved for 11 years was still alive. Still trying to say something she didn't have the courage to say out loud. Ren had pushed that thought away. She pushed it away again on the bus. She pushed it away walking through the cathedral doors. She stopped pushing it away the moment Isabeau stepped off that altar and walked toward her. Isabeau moved through the frozen cathedral like someone who had already decided the cost and paid it in advance. No tears. No performance. Heels clicking marble. Dorian hissed her name once, twice, and she didn't even tilt her head. She stopped in front of Ren, close enough that Ren could smell her perfume, the same one she'd worn in college, the same one that used to mean safety, and looked at her with eyes that had stopped pretending. "I didn't know about the company," she said. "Low. Tight. Built carefully so it wouldn't crack. He showed me paperwork. He said you walked away. That you wanted out." Ren held very still. "He showed you paperwork," she repeated. Not a question. Processing. Isabeau closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." Ren exhaled the quiet laugh of someone watching a lie finally show its full shape. "Isabeau. I was in a hospital bed. I didn't sign anything willingly." The silence that followed had texture rough and cold, like something being torn slowly. 300 guests recalibrated in real time. You could hear it, not in noise, but in the absence of it. That particular held-breath silence of a room full of people realizing the story they came to witness was not the story they were actually in. Dorian stepped down from the altar, moving fast, voice pitched low. This is not the place. Teja stood up. Just stood. The way a door closes final, without drama. Dorian stopped walking. Stopped completely. 2 meters away, unable to explain to himself or anyone else why his feet had made that decision. Isabeau turned to look at Dorian. Really look. 11 seconds. Nobody counted, but everyone felt them. Then she reached up both hands and unclipped her cathedral veil. She didn't drop it. She held it out. To Ren. Not as a gesture. As a statement. Ren took it. And Isabeau reached for the pearl earrings next, one, then the other, and placed them in Ren's open palm. Her fingers were ice cold. She leaned forward, close enough that only the nearest microphone caught it. 3 words, barely breath. I'm so sorry. Then, quieter still, so quiet it almost didn't exist. Thank you for coming. Not sarcasm. Not performance. Genuine. Like a woman who had mailed a dried flower inside a cruel envelope and prayed the right person would understand it, had just found out she was understood. Ren closed her hand around her mother's earrings. Felt their small weight settle into her palm like something returning home. She looked at Isabeau, really looked, and what she felt wasn't what she expected. Not triumph. Not forgiveness either, not yet. That would take longer and require more honesty than a cathedral could hold. Something more complicated. Recognition. 2 women. 1 man. The same lie told in 2 different directions. Dorian hadn't just stolen a company. He'd stolen a friendship, split it down the middle, and used both halves against each other. And now those halves were standing in the same pew, and he was the only one in the room who had lost something irreplaceable. Isabeau straightened her spine, walked to the front pew, sat down, alone. And Dorian Co. stood in his cathedral, the one he no longer owned, between an altar nobody was standing at and an audience that had completely stopped being on his side. But stay with me, because he still had his phone. And desperate men with phones make calls that bring the wrong people through doors. Dorian's phone lit up in his hand, and he looked down at it the way people look at car accidents, unable to stop, unable to process fast enough. His banking app was open. Ren could see the screen from where she stood. Not the numbers. Just his face. And his face was doing something she had never seen it do in 4 years of marriage. It was losing color in real time. Notification after notification. Each one a door closing. The operating account for the cosmetics brand frozen. The personal credit line called in. The business expansion fund suspended pending review. His thumb scrolled and each swipe took something else. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. More like the sound a person makes when they step onto ice they were certain would hold them. Teja glanced at the phone without expression. Every cent you stole from her skincare line, he said quietly, just paid for the gas in those 4 Rolls Royces outside. A pause. You're literally paying for your own exit. The silence that followed that line was the kind that doesn't recover. Dorian's jaw tightened. His thumb stopped scrolling. Because there was nothing left to scroll through. For years of architecture, built on Ren's foundation, her formula, her 3 a.m. product testing and 16-hour days and $200 starting investment, gone in the time it takes to read a notification. And the darkest irony? The wedding. The $40,000 flowers bleeding their expensive scent into the air right now. The string quartet. The catering. The cathedral he was currently standing in, which, let's not forget, belonged to the man beside his ex-wife. All of it funded, ultimately, by money that was never his to spend. He had thrown the most elaborate party of his life with stolen money. And the person he stole it from was sitting in the 3rd row watching him get the bill. 300 guests were no longer pretending to look elsewhere. The pastor had closed his Bible. The bridesmaids had formed an uncertain cluster near the altar steps, bouquets wilting slightly in nervous hands. Isabeau sat down in the front pew, not beside Dorian, away from him. She pulled off her veil with both hands and folded it neatly in her lap. Stared at nothing. That detail, the neat folding, broke something small in Ren's chest. Because that's what women do when they're holding themselves together in public. They make things tidy. They control the one thing they still can. Ren recognized that stillness. She'd worn it herself in a hospital bed, paperwork in her hands, trusting a man who was already planning his next move. Isabeau looked up from the folded veil, found Ren's eyes across the cathedral. Something passed between them, not forgiveness, not yet, nothing that clean or fast, but recognition. Two women in the same cathedral, on the same morning, understanding simultaneously that they had been characters in a story written entirely by someone else. Isabeau stood, crossed the cathedral floor slowly, stopped in front of Ren. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I want you to know something." Ren waited. "The distribution contracts, the retail partnerships your brand built, he kept renewing them under his name. Every quarter. I did the admin." She swallowed. "I can send you every file. Every contact. Every contract. All of it." Ren stared at her. That wasn't an apology. That was a weapon handed over, handle first, by someone choosing a side. Late. But choosing. Teja reached into his jacket, placed a document on the pew beside Ren. She looked down, felt the air leave her lungs completely. Original company registration. Her name. Her signature. Her brand returned. Stamped and dated this morning, 2 hours before the ceremony. She hadn't asked for this. This was beyond whatever quiet agreement she thought she'd made on that phone call 6 days ago. She looked at Taeju. "I didn't ask you to do this." He met her eyes, steady and unbothered. "You asked me to make you feel like it was worth showing up." He paused. "Consider the ask fulfilled." Ren held the document against her chest and felt something she hadn't felt in 8 months settle back into place. Not happiness. Something older. Something they had tried to take from her and failed. Herself. "Don't you dare click away now." Because Dorian Co. just stood back up. And a man with nothing left to lose, standing in a cathedral he no longer owns, is the most dangerous and most stupid thing in any room. 3 years of her life. Returned in a single document. Most people never get that moment, not because they don't deserve it, but because nobody showed up for them the way Teja showed up for Ren. Subscribe, so you never miss the story of someone who finally had someone show up. Dorian grabbed Ren's wrist. That was the stupid thing. Not a shove. Not a shout. Just his hand, closing around her wrist the way it used to when he wanted to redirect a conversation she was winning. Old muscle memory. Old control. Except this wasn't their kitchen. This was a cathedral with 300 witnesses, 2 photographers who hadn't stopped shooting, and a man standing 4 feet away who had dismantled Dorian's entire financial life before breakfast. Ren looked down at his hand on her wrist. Looked up at his face. "Let go," she said. Quiet. No tremor. He didn't. "You think you can walk in here?" And Teja moved. Not aggressively. Not loudly. He stepped forward, closed the small distance between himself and Dorian, and leaned in. Close. The way you lean toward someone when what you're about to say is meant only for them, and meant to end something permanently. His voice was barely above a whisper. Ren was close enough to hear every word. "I didn't just buy the building, Dorian. I bought the recordings. The hospital room recordings. Where you stood over her and made her sign those papers." Complete stillness. Dorian's grip on Ren's wrist didn't loosen, it dissolved. Like his hand forgot what it was doing. His face didn't crumble dramatically. It just emptied. The way a room empties when everyone leaves at once. No single moment. Just suddenly vacant. Tejas straightened up. Unhurried. Adjusted his cufflink. Took one small step back. And looked at Dorian the way you look at something you've already decided the fate of. The recordings exist. The paperwork irregularities exist. And now, he said, the people who need to have both have both. Dorian's mouth opened. Nothing came out. For the first time since Ren had known this man, across a marriage, a courtroom, and a cathedral, Dorian Co. had absolutely nothing to say. 300 people couldn't hear what had just been said. But 300 people could see what it did. They watched a groom's hand drop from his ex-wife's wrist. Watched his face go the color and consistency of old ash. Watched him take one step backward, not strategic, not chosen, just the involuntary step of a body receiving news the mind hasn't processed yet. The murmuring started. Low, then not low. A woman near the back said, distinctly, "Did he just grab her?" And the room's temperature changed in the way it changes when collective sympathy picks a side and locks in. Dorian heard it, felt it. 300 people who came to celebrate him, recalibrating in real time. Isabeau had seen everything from the altar steps. She hadn't moved since Taja leaned in. But her eyes were doing the math. Fast. Quietly. The way intelligent people absorb information they weren't prepared for and immediately begin reordering everything they know. She stepped down from the altar, crossed the cathedral floor, stopped in front of Ren, not Dorian, not Teju, Ren. Her voice was barely held together. "He told me you signed willingly. He showed me documents." She swallowed. Was there really a recording? Ren looked at her, felt the complicated, exhausting truth of this moment, that the woman who had hurt her was also a woman who had been lied to. Badly. Deliberately. By the same man. "Yes," she said simply. Isabeau closed her eyes for 3 full seconds. When she opened them, something had hardened there. Not toward Ren. Toward the man standing 6 feet away who suddenly couldn't look at either of them. She turned to face Dorian. And what Isabeau said next quietly, in front of 300 people, on what was supposed to be her wedding day, is the thing that broke the internet when the footage surfaced 48 hours later. "I want to speak to your lawyer," she said. "Not our lawyer. Your lawyer. Today." Dorian stared at her. "Isabeau, today, Dorian." She turned back to Ren. And in a voice so low it was almost private, "I'm sorry. For all of it." Then she walked back toward the altar, picked up her bouquet, set it down again like it had suddenly become a thing she didn't want to be holding, and sat in the front pew facing forward. Done. Just like that. The other woman had just become the most important witness in the room. And Dorian Seo, standing alone in the center of his own cathedral on the best day of his carefully planned life, had never looked more completely, irreversibly alone. The 2 men in dark jackets weren't creditors. Ren understood that the moment she saw their suits, not expensive in the way Teju's suit was expensive, which was quiet and certain. Expensive in the way of men who need you to know their title before they speak. Structured. Institutional. One carried a leather folder pressed flat against his side. The other wore the expression of a man who had delivered bad news in professional settings so many times it no longer registered on his face. She'd seen that expression once before on the lawyer who told her the company transfer was legally airtight. Men who work for systems wear their conscience differently. Dorian's father recognized them before Dorian did. That was the detail that cracked everything open, because a father who recognizes his son's board members walking into his son's wedding and goes pale instead of relieved is a father who already knew something was wrong. Dorian crossed the cathedral floor toward them fast, too fast, the walk of a man trying to intercept a conversation before it becomes a scene. He was already too late. The man with the leather folder opened it, removed a single document, held it out. Dorian took it and read, and Ren watched the color leave his face in a way that had nothing to do with the loan, nothing to do with the accounts, nothing to do with anything Teju had arranged this morning. This was something older. The board had been building this for months. The fraudulent company transfer, Ren's company, her signature forged while she lay in a hospital bed, had surfaced during a routine audit 6 weeks ago. They'd been quiet about it. Gathering. Waiting for the right moment to formalize what they already knew. They had chosen this morning. His wedding morning. In front of 300 guests. Which means, and let this land properly, they chose the same morning Teja chose. Independently. Because when a man builds his life on theft, the receipts have a way of arriving all at once. The document was a termination of directorship. Effective immediately. Dorian Seo, CEO, public face, the man whose name sat on the masthead of a company built on a woman's 3 years of 16-hour days, was being removed. Not quietly. Not privately. Here. Now. In a cathedral full of witnesses and 2 photographers who had not stopped shooting since the moment the Rolls-Royces arrived. Teja watched this without moving. Without satisfaction, even. Just watching the way you watch weather, something that was always going to happen, arriving on schedule. Dorian's hands were shaking. The document shook with them. He looked at his father, not for advice, for rescue. His father looked at the stone floor. That single look between them said everything a conversation couldn't. His father had known about the audit. Had known and said nothing. Had dressed up, shown up, and stood in the front pew watching his son perform confidence over a foundation that had already been condemned. The bridesmaids had stopped pretending to look elsewhere. The guests near the front heard enough. A woman in a yellow dress leaned to her husband and whispered something. He nodded. The whisper moved through the pews like weather through grass. Ren felt something she hadn't expected, not satisfaction, not relief. Something more complicated. Because watching a person lose everything in public, even a person who earned every bit of it, carries a weight no revenge fantasy prepares you for. She'd imagined this moment, or something like it, on bad nights over 8 months. She'd imagined feeling large. She felt quiet instead. Tejas stepped slightly closer, not touching her, just near enough that she could feel the steadiness of him. "You didn't do this," he said, reading her without being asked. He did this to himself. "You just stopped absorbing the damage." She exhaled, nodded once, looked at Dorian one final time, standing in the middle of his $40,000 flowers, termination papers in one hand, dead phone in the other, groom's boutonniere still pinned to a suit he could no longer afford, and felt the last thread of whatever had kept her tangled in his story simply release. Gone. Clean. She was done. But stay right there, because Dorian Co. still had one move left. And it was the worst decision he ever made. Dorian stood up and pointed at Ren. In front of everyone. Finger extended, voice cracked at the edges, the last performance of a man who'd run out of every other option. "You destroyed my life." Not a whisper. Not contained. The full cathedral heard it, every guest, every photographer, both creditors, the pastor, the bridesmaids still holding their wilting bouquets. His voice bounced off stone walls and came back sounding smaller than he intended. That's the thing about cathedrals. They were built to make sincere things sound enormous. Hollow things just echo. 300 people watched Dorian Co. point at his ex-wife and accuse her of ruining him. 300 people who had watched him grab her wrist 20 minutes ago. Who had watched her sit quietly in the third row while his entire financial architecture collapsed under the weight of his own decisions. The room's sympathy had an address. It wasn't his. Ren stood up slowly. Not because she was angry. Because she was done being looked down at by a man at eye level. "You filed fraudulent paperwork on me while I was in a hospital bed," she said. Calm. Clear. The volume of a woman who doesn't need the room to lean in. The room was already leaning. "You took 3 years of my work. You invited me here to watch you celebrate it." She paused. "Let it breathe. I didn't destroy your life, Dorian. I just stopped rebuilding it for you." Absolute silence. The kind that has weight and texture and smell, like the air before lightning. Then a single person near the middle pews started clapping. Slow. Deliberate. Then 2. Then the sound multiplied the way sounds do in stone rooms until it was less like applause and more like a verdict delivered by an audience that hadn't been asked but couldn't help themselves. Dorian's face collapsed inward, not in tears, not dramatically. Just the slow, terrible recognition of a man realizing the story he'd been telling himself had just been read aloud in front of witnesses and didn't survive the exposure. Isabeau stood from the front pew. She didn't look at Dorian. She picked up her folded veil, tucked it under her arm, and walked toward the side exit with the quiet, purposeful energy of a woman who had just made an irreversible decision. She paused at the end of Ren's pew. Her eyes dropped to the pearl earrings in Ren's palm, her own ears now bare, 2 small pink marks where they'd sat all morning. Something moved across her face. Guilt. Real guilt. The kind that doesn't argue with itself. Ren looked at her. Held the moment just long enough. Then, steady, unhurried, with the kind of calm that only comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose and everything already returned, she said, "Keep the dress. It was bought with my money anyway. Consider it a parting gift for helping me find my spine." The cathedral went so quiet you could hear the candles. Isabeau blinked once. Nodded once. No argument. No defense. Because there wasn't one. She walked out the side door without another word, ivory dress sweeping marble behind her, and the sound of it fading was the cleanest full stop this story ever had. Dorian watched Isabeau disappear, and something structural left his posture permanently. He sat back down in the pew. This time he didn't get up. Taja placed his hand briefly, lightly, at the small of Ren's back. A question, not a claim. She didn't move away. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at the cathedral one final time. The frozen guests. The empty altar. The pastor holding his closed Bible like a man who'd prepared for a wedding and attended something else entirely. She picked up her bag, felt the company document inside it, her name, her signature, her work returned. Pressed the pearl earrings into her pocket. Her mother's. Warm now from being held. Back where they belonged. "Yes," she said. And they walked toward the doors, not rushing, not performing, just two people leaving a room that had nothing left to offer them. Behind them, 300 guests sat in a cathedral that belonged to someone else, around flowers that meant nothing now, at a wedding that never quite finished. Not one person watched Dorian Co. Not one. They all watched her walk out. Don't close this. Don't even think about it. Because what happened between Ren and Taeju on those cathedral steps, that's what this whole story was actually building toward. The cold hit her face the moment those doors swung open and Ren almost laughed because she'd ridden a city bus to this cathedral with $11 and resold heels, and now she was standing on its steps beside a man who owned the building behind her. Life has a very specific sense of humor. The 4 black Rolls-Royces sat in a clean row at the curb. One driver stood beside the last car, door already open. Like they'd never doubted she was walking out. Taeju descended the steps beside her and said nothing for a moment, just let the city breathe around them. Traffic. Pigeons. Somewhere, a car radio playing a song nobody was listening to. Normal sounds. The kind that remind you the world kept moving while yours was standing still. She stopped at the bottom step, turned to face him. "I need you to answer something honestly." He waited. "Why did you return the company?" That wasn't the favor. He was quiet long enough that she prepared herself for a redirect. "Then, the night we met. My brother's paperwork. You found an administrative error that would have voided his insurance coverage. You corrected it before you told us. We never would have known." She stared at him. She barely remembered that detail. It was just a broken thing she fixed because leaving it broken was unthinkable. "That's a small thing," she said. He shook his head. Slow. Certain. People who fix things nobody asked them to fix, for strangers they'll never see again, that is not small. That is character. Your company was always yours. I returned what already belonged to you. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, typed 3 words, pocketed it. There's one more thing. She felt the old tension, the waiting for the catch reflex her marriage had installed in her bones. But his voice stayed even. The retail contracts. The distribution network you built that Dorian kept running under his name. Those transferred with ownership this morning. Back to you. He told her the number. She went completely still. It wasn't a medium number. It was the kind of number that permanently raises the floor of a person's life. She sat down on the cathedral steps. Right there. Cold stone through her black dress. She put her face in her hands, not crying, just receiving. Letting something enormous land without immediately trying to manage it. Taeju sat beside her. Not close enough to crowd her. Not far enough to be absent. Just present. The way very few people know how to be. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the pearl earrings. Held them in her open palm. Her mother had worn these to every hard beginning. Every moment that required her to remember her own name. Isabeau had worn them to a wedding that collapsed. Now they were back where they started. Small, warm, unimpressive looking. Carrying more history than they had any right to. She told me, Ren said quietly, that you wear these when you need to remember who you are. Not who someone convinced you to be. She closed her fingers around them. Taeja watched her face the way people watch something they intend to remember. Not a glance, not a stare. A storing. After a long moment, she looked up at the gray sky. Exhaled. I came here today just to survive this. That was the whole plan. He nodded. Most people who've been through what you have just want to survive. The city moved around them, indifferent and alive. What do you want now? She thought about it. Really thought, not the reflex answer, not the safe answer. The true one. The company. Her name on something she built with her own hands. Her mother's earrings back in her pocket. A man sitting beside her on cold stone who returned things that belonged to her without being asked, and never once made her feel small for having lost them. More than surviving, she said. He looked at her. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something quieter, something that had been waiting longer than today to exist. Behind them, inside that cathedral, 300 guests sat among $40,000 worth of flowers at a wedding that never finished. Dorian Seo sat in a pew he didn't own, in a building he didn't own, with debts he couldn't pay and a story he could no longer control. He had invited Ren here to be the proof that he won. Instead, he became the proof that you cannot build a real life on a stolen foundation, because stolen things remember who they belong to. And as they sat on those cold stone steps, Ren realized that sometimes, to build a kingdom, you first have to let the wrong man burn the house down. You've watched this entire story, which means you already know that the people who get written off are usually the ones worth watching. Don't be the person who finds this channel after everyone else already did. Subscribe now, the next story is already waiting.